Thank you for attending this forum on the Parramatta CBD Planning Proposal. My name is John Brockhoff. I'm the National Policy Manager at the Planning Institute of Australia, and I'm pleased to be facilitating this session given the vital role of Parramatta as Sydney's central city. Jennifer Concato, Council's Executive Director, City Planning and Design, will be presenting today. The Parramatta CBD Planning Proposal sets out draft planning controls which are currently on public exhibition, and Council's now seeking feedback to inform the final outcomes. This forum is one of a number of ways Council is encouraging feedback from the wider Parramatta community. The structure of this forum is in two parts. Firstly, Jen will present the details of the planning proposal, then we'll run a facilitated Q&A where you'll have the opportunity to put questions to Jen. Then I'll close the session. We expect the session to finish at 2 p.m. However, we have room to extend question time a little beyond that if there are still more questions, and Council's committed to respond to all the questions if we don't make all of them. Just before we start, a few housekeeping notes. Your microphones have been muted for this session and you can't be seen via your camera. However, we'd love to hear from you during our text-based Q&A session. We'll announce when the session's open, and please keep your questions ready and prepare them as we go. There's a play and pause feature at the bottom of the screen if you wish to use it, and the forum will also be recorded and shared shortly after the event should you experience any technical difficulties. And I'll now hand over to Jen.
Thank you, John. Firstly, the City of Parramatta Council acknowledges the Darug people, who are the traditional custodians of the land of Parramatta. Council pays respects to the elders past and present of the Darug Nation and extends that respect to other First Nations people dialing in today. So thank you for those that have dialed in. I'll now get into the presentation and a fair amount of detail given the audience. So what is the planning proposal? The planning proposal is seeking to change the planning controls that currently apply to the Parramatta CBD, which are contained within the Parramatta Local Environmental Plan 2011. In summary, the planning proposal seeks to do a couple of things in the CBD. Firstly, to amend existing controls, and secondly, to introduce new controls. All in all, what we're seeking to do here is to facilitate the delivery of up to 50,000 additional new jobs and 14,000 additional new apartments over the next 40 years. So I'll start with some background on the project. Now, this project has been going on for a number of years, several years in fact, and has involved many elements given the complexity of this proposal. There have been numerous technical studies prepared across a range of issues to support the proposal that's currently on public exhibition, and they've included heritage, urban design, contamination, flood risk, infrastructure planning, as well as traffic and transport. There have also been many decisions of council at various stages in the process. The project has involved extensive liaison with the Department of Planning, Industry and Environment, and also consultation with key public authorities. The two in particular that I'll mention are Transport for New South Wales and Heritage New South Wales. And finally, consultation has also been undertaken with other stakeholders such as community members, landowners and industry over the past several years. So some strategic context for the project. The Greater Sydney Commission's and therefore the state government strategies affecting the Central City District sees Parramatta as the central city for Greater Sydney, placing it very much at its heart. This represents a major shift from the previously long-held idea that the Sydney CBD will serve as the metropolitan Sydney's major CBD into the future. Our recently adopted LSPS, our Local Strategic Planning Statement, very much supports the state government's vision that the Parramatta CBD forms part of the Central City District Metropolitan Centre. So I'm going to start with a broad overview of the planning proposal before I get into the details of it. And I feel, and the details that I'll be providing, we've identified as those that would benefit some explanation, particularly to a group like this. So the overview, this is a very useful diagram because it does highlight that the Parramatta CBD Planning Proposal, which is the pink box on the top left, is very much a component of a broader framework review that the Council is undertaking. So all in all, we refer to this as the Parramatta CBD Planning Framework Review. And there are three main components to that. The first one is the Parramatta CBD Planning Proposal, which is on exhibition at the moment. We are also working on a Parramatta CBD Infrastructure Strategy, which will be the subject of a future exhibition. And then also an amendment to the Parramatta DCP to support the amended and new controls that we are proposing within the planning proposal. Now, also on exhibition is the other pink box on the screen, which is the draft update of the Parramatta Floodplain Risk Management Plan. And I'll briefly talk a little bit about that later on. And also critical to this piece will be an integrated transport plan, which again will be placed on public exhibition. Now, these future exhibitions, we are at this point hoping to run early next year, but those dates have not yet been set. And so what is currently on exhibition are the two pink elements, the CBD Planning Proposal and then the updated Flood Risk Management Plan. So this diagram very much illustrates the framework that we're working on and how this all will come together. So where will the new controls apply? So the planning proposal applies to the areas shown in blue and green on the map on the screen. However, only the blue area will be subject to change. There will be no changes are proposed to the planning controls within the green area. Okay, so the blue area is generally bound by Church Street Auto Alley to the south, the railway line and Harris Street to the east, Pennant Hills Road to the north and Marsden Street to the west. The green area includes Parramatta Park and the Park Edge highly sensitive area. These controls, as I mentioned earlier, won't change on account of the 2015 conservation agreement that's been entered into with the state and the federal governments relating to the World Heritage listing of Old Government House and its domain. The pink areas that you see to the south and to the north are not included in this planning proposal, and they will be the subject of further analysis and study separately to this process. And they are often referred to as the planning investigation areas. So what will the planning proposal seek to do? So there are a couple of slides on this, and I do want to spend some time on it because these are very much our key objectives as a council. The first one is to expand the commercial core land zoning. Now, this will increase the commercial amount of floor space, therefore bringing an increased amount of jobs to the CBD. The B3 commercial core zone is proposed to be increased in size from 22 hectares to 38 hectares. That equals about a 75% increase. This planning proposal also seeks to increase building heights and floor space ratios, which enables more apartments and office towers, bringing again more jobs and homes to the CBD. It amends the existing bonus floor space controls that encourages high quality design buildings, typically called design excellence, and also introduces new controls for high performing buildings. It also has a fundamental component of it where it does also protect solar access to key public spaces, to protect those public spaces, particularly in winter, and also significant heritage items such as Lancer Barracks and Experiment Farm. Now, the planning proposal does seek to provide incentives for additional office and commercial development to facilitate the jobs and the services that we are seeking in the CBD. It does require, the planning proposal does seek to require new mixed-use residential towers to include community infrastructure as part of their development, which applies when development is seeking to utilise the additional floor space being offered under the planning proposal. Now, what do we mean by community infrastructure? It essentially means things such as community facilities, public places and recreation facilities, and I'll get into a little bit more detail on that in a moment. The planning proposal does provide controls which aim to protect heritage, including additional heritage controls and lower heights in some areas to protect heritage streetscapes or to minimise overshadowing on heritage conservation areas. It does require the ground floor of certain buildings to be activated with activated uses such as cafes and shops, so they provide interest for passing pedestrians and vibrancy along our streets. The planning proposal also includes the following. It does reserve land for road widenings, bicycle lanes, etc. That's very important to protect future transport needs, particularly when we are proposing to seek density significantly, or increase it significantly. It does propose lower rates for car park provision, similar to those that you'll find in the Sydney CBD. Now, this will help to minimise traffic impacts of new development on the road network and also to encourage greater use of public transport. It does provide new controls and a framework to better manage flood risk, given that the Parramatta CBD is located on a floodplain. And it also encourages tower design to produce tall but slender forms, which is generally associated with a high quality urban design outcome. So now I'm going to focus on some aspects of the planning proposal that might benefit from a more detailed explanation. I'll start with building height controls. So you will notice, if you have had a look at the planning proposal documentation, that there are two height maps in the documentation. The first map is referred to as the base height control, and it generally reflects the existing height controls in our current LEP 2011. It does also reflect site-specific PPs that have been notified or gazetted up until the 31st of July. Now, there's also a clause that supports the height of building maps. Now, this essentially just identifies the base height control that's applicable to land within the CBD. There's then a incentive height controls map. So the first one was base, and this one's called incentive. Now, this applies to land that is zoned B4 mixed use. And can only be taken up if community infrastructure is provided under the proposed clause 7.6H. Now, this map again is supported by a clause. Now, you will see that there is a fair amount of uncoloured sites on this map, and the reason for that is that these sites are zoned B3 commercial core, or have no uplift in height due to heritage, urban design or sun access requirements. These have all been backed by supporting technical studies, and so therefore the maximum heights for these sites are those that are shown on the base height map. So both the base and incentive heights have a maximum mapped height of 211 metres. So that's roughly about 60 stories for a resi building and 53 stories for a commercial building. When combined with the design excellence bonus of 15%, that will allow buildings up to 243 metres. So that's about 75 stories for a residential building and 60 stories for a commercial building. Now, any height, it is important to note that any height in the Parramatta CBD that is above 156 metres RL is a controlled activity under the Airports Act, and that therefore requires referral to the relevant airport authorities. Okay, so now I'll cover the floor space ratio controls. These are a little bit more complex than the height controls. But similarly, if you've had a look at the planning proposal documentation, you would have noticed again two FSR maps, sorry. There's a base FSR map and then there's an incentive FSR map. So with the base FSR map, generally, again, these reflect the existing FSR controls that you will see in our current LEP. This map has been updated to reflect site-specific PPs that have been gazetted or notified since up to the 31st of July. The base map is not subject to the FSR sliding scale, and again, there's a clause that accompanies this FSR map. So there is also the incentive FSR map. This applies to all land zoned B4 mixed use. And again, this can only be taken up if community infrastructure is provided on the sites as described within the clause within the documentation. And again, this is supported by a clause. Now, you'll see again, similarly with the incentive heights map, that there are uncoloured sites on this map. Now, that essentially means that those uncoloured sites are essentially those sites that are Zone B3 commercial core, or again have no uplift in FSR due to heritage, urban design or sun access requirements. And so therefore the maximum controls that apply there for those sites will be the base FSR map. So how do these FSRs work? So to address the increased demand on infrastructure, Council does need to assist in providing new or enhanced infrastructure. And so the provisions within the planning proposal require certain development utilising the incentive FSR and height to provide community infrastructure. Now, this community infrastructure includes things such as community facilities, public space or recreational facilities on sites. Now, the important point to make here is that prior to completion of the planning proposal, Council will need to undertake a review of the infrastructure funding framework for the CBD, including the preparation of a new development contributions plan to assist in the funding and the delivery of community infrastructure within the CBD, particularly when we are seeking a significant increase in dwelling and job numbers over the 40-year period. So a bit more on FSRs, particularly when it comes to design excellence. The Council is very passionate about raising the bar when it comes to the delivery of design excellence, not only through our public domain work, but then also in buildings. So we have revised the design excellence controls as part of this planning proposal. So fundamentally, our objective is to promote and to secure high quality development. It provides a bonus of 15% on both height and FSR controls where a design competition is held and the final design is considered to achieve design excellence. The table explains the differences that we are seeking as part of this process. The column on the left are the current design excellence triggers, and the column on the right are what we are proposing. So fundamentally, what we're looking at doing is decreasing the heights of proposals that would trigger the need for a design excellence competition. So at the moment, if your building is greater than 55 metres, you'd need to go through a design competition process. What we're proposing here is that buildings greater than 40 metres would need to go through a design competition process. There are also site requirement sizes that you'll see on the table between 1,000 and 800 square metres, and also development that directly adjoins a heritage item seeking to achieve an FSR of 3 to 1 or greater. And that again is another provision to ensure that our heritage is very well respected and protected. This planning proposal also seeks to introduce a new provision that's not currently within our current planning framework, and that's the high performing buildings clause. Now, it does provide a bonus FSR of 5%, subject to achieving higher environmental performance above basics. Now, this would apply to sites with a 6 to 1 FSR or higher. And the bonus FSR is only applicable for residential flat buildings and mixed-use developments. That includes a residential component. Mandatory environmental performance requirements for certain commercial buildings are also included. The specific requirements include achieving specified targets for energy emissions and water use. And this is very much around increasing and elevating the need for better designed and performing buildings, particularly from an environmental perspective. So there is an opportunity sites map that some of you may have seen within the documentation. This is a new provision which provides a bonus of up to 3 to 1 on these sites that are highlighted in beige or yellow, but they must meet certain criteria, and that relates to design, geometry and site size. And if that criteria is met, that is described within the accompanying clause, then that site could benefit from an additional FSR of 3 to 1. All right, so I've just gone through a number of maps and bonuses, and so we find this bar diagram a bit easier to, I suppose, illustrate what this all means when put together. So the first bar shows where only the base FSR in navy blue and design excellence is used, which is in the red. In the second and third bars, community infrastructure is provided in the development, so incentive FSR is added, which is the purple. As well as bonuses for design excellence and high performing buildings. So design excellence in red and high performing buildings in green. The third bar shows that if you are a site that's located on the opportunity sites map and you achieve the criteria within the accompanying clause, that you could potentially also achieve an additional 3 to 1, and that's located on top of those other bonuses. So this diagram is explained, or a version of this is explained on the material on our website. So I encourage you to have a look at how these actually build and work together. So as the point I made earlier, one of the key objectives for us is to facilitate more jobs. And there are also further FSR incentives to facilitate this. So in certain parts of the B4 mixed use zone, a minimum 1-to-1 commercial component is required. And any additional commercial above this is exempt from the overall FSR calculations. And for those that are following, that relates to clause 7.6c. In the B3 commercial core, office developments is exempt from FSR controls. And so very much the fundamental control there is height. Now for the key point here is that for both of these incentives to operate, the site needs to be a minimum area of 1,800 square metres. Now, with regards to sun access provision, this is something that Council considers critical to the success and the growth of the CBD, particularly from an amenity perspective. Now, the planning proposal does provide solar access protection, particularly to public open space in Parramatta Square, Prince Alfred Square, the part of the Parramatta River foreshore in Jubilee Park. Also heritage items in Kirtledge at Lancer Barracks and the Experiment Farm. The planning proposal introduces a new sun access protection map. And generally speaking, midwinter is the measure that we've utilised to ensure that there is appropriate solar access to these spaces. Now, heritage protection. So this is critical for Parramatta for two reasons. Firstly, there are many heritage sites in and adjacent to the CBD. And secondly, the CBD also abuts an important internationally significant heritage precinct, being Old Government House and its domain. So what are we doing in this PP to protect heritage? So we have sought to apply lower heights and FSRs in certain cases to minimise impact on heritage. Some examples of where we've done this include the western end of the Great Western Highway to protect solar access to South Parramatta Heritage Conservation Area, Church Streets to protect the heritage streetscape, northern and western areas immediately adjoining St John's Cemetery to minimise impacts to the heritage cemetery. There is also amending the trigger for design competition, which I mentioned earlier. So any significant buildings next to heritage items would be required to undertake a design competition. We have also introduced a new clause in addition to the existing standard template clause of 5.10 in the existing LEP. Now that very much relates to ensuring that there are heads of considerations that need to be addressed as part of the assessment of a DA. And so the details of that are in the documentation if you're particularly interested in that. There are also special provision controls relating to the preservation of, and again, no changes to the park edge highly sensitive area, and also identifying certain sites on the special provisions area map. Sun access is also protected for certain heritage conservation areas that would have been affected if we didn't lower some of the heights, particularly on the eastern edge of the CBD. And heritage items that are within the LEP 2011 are retained within this planning proposal. So, as I mentioned earlier, the Parramatta CBD is located on the floodplain, and so we need to demonstrate how increased density can be accommodated on the floodplain while still addressing and minimising stormwater and flood risk. So we are proposing a new clause within the documentation. The new clause applies to land affected by the probable maximum flood. Now, our strategy here is to allow for shelter in place. Now, all sites must have an emergency access point that is above the 1% flood level to manage secondary risks. We do have provisions in the clause and the documentation to ensure that all sites also need to withstand the forces of floodwaters and debris. And this is supported by the revised flood risk management plan that is also on public exhibition. So overall, the proposal provides a number of benefits. In summary, improved environmental outcomes through a new high-performing buildings clause and better flood risk management, very much suited and tailored for Parramatta. More opportunities for jobs and businesses, particularly when looking at the increased FSRs and incentivising commercial developments. Connecting community infrastructure to the provision of increased yields. Improving urban design outcomes, particularly around street activation, solar access and design excellence. And including new protections for heritage through new controls. Now, so I'll briefly cover, we're almost at the end here, about the community engagement program and how we're actually engaging with the community and industry. So we are holding a six-week exhibition period, so 2 weeks longer than what we would ordinarily have to do, given the climate that we're in. The conclusion of the engagement period is the 2nd of November. So submissions are due by that date. So you will you will see that there are a number of ways that we are engaging and communicating this important piece of work. There's obviously a lot of information on the Council's website. We have notified just shy of 30,000 households and businesses, notifying them of the exhibition. There's obviously summary sheets and fact sheets that have been produced. We're holding this forum. I'm also participating in a range of other forums that I've been invited to. There are community question and answer sessions too that have been organised. Phone a planner. If you've got a specific question about the CBDPP, there's an opportunity to actually make a booking and to speak to a planner directly. There's also social media activity, and we've also notified key stakeholders that we've been working with over the past several years, letting them know of the exhibition period. So in terms of next steps, this is a time frame that most people that are quite active in development within the CBD often ask us. What's your time frame? And so with a exhibition concluding in November, and really depending on the volume and the nature of the submissions we receive, we are proposing to report the outcome of that public exhibition to the local planning panel early in the new year. There will need to obviously be a consultation with our councillors through that process. Following the LPP report, there will be a report to council on the exhibition outcomes, and we're aiming for a March report there. That will then allow, you know, a few months for the legal drafting to occur and liaison with the Department of Planning to then conclude this process. So thank you very much, John. I'll now hand it back to you.
Well, thanks, Jen. We'll now be opening up for questions, and we can use the Q&A function. To put a question to this forum, please enter your question in text, obviously, through the Q&A section button. That's the button with the two balloons, the question mark. So please, I hope you've remembered your questions and you're using that Q&A button. And while we're waiting, this session will run till 2, but if we have a backlog, we'll extend the Q&A session slightly before we wrap up. And Council has given a commitment to follow through the questions that we can't get to if there are any. While we're waiting for the questions to come through, I might just ask Jen if she can kick off with her understanding of, in total, what would you say Council's looking to achieve through the CBD planning proposal?
I think the key aspect of it is fundamentally cementing CBD as the genuine jobs and housing hub of Central City. The planning controls that we have at the moment, for the most part, that's been demonstrated through this process, are outdated and not quite aligned with the strategic objectives of both the council and the state government. And so there is a significant push because there's significant value in concentrating high density living and job growth within the heart of CBD of Parramatta. And so the key objective here is to highlight and cement the CBD status in the importance and the role within broader Sydney, by facilitating greater job growth and greater residential growth over a period of time. This is a long-term plan. It's a 40-year plan. We don't expect this to be delivered tomorrow within the next 5 years, but it is very important and very wise for there to be a long-term strategic plan to achieve that objective.
Thanks, Jen. Look, there are some elements of your presentation that are familiar to some of the viewers about what's been happening so far in the CBD. Does the planning proposal reflect the direction that Council's been following for the CBD for, say, the last 5 years? And is anything markedly different?
I wouldn't say anything's remarkably different. And the core of your question is, you know, have we been kind of consistent in our focus and application? Yes, we have been. This planning proposal is very much a complex one. That's why it has partly taken us some time. And because there's been a significant amount of engagement and interest by stakeholders, and also the need to prepare technical studies to ensure that the proposal is as robust as possible. So yes, no, we haven't, our objective and our principles have been consistent over the past several years, and are consistently placed within our strategic projects that are future looking.
Right. I might just ask, how will you spent quite a bit of attention on the floor space and height incentives. Just in total, without going into the detail, how collectively will those floor space and height incentives achieve a net community benefit for the city?
Without going into the detail, the fundamental component of that is that it is linked to community infrastructure and its delivery. And so the planning proposal has been specifically designed to have both base height and FSI controls and incentive height and FSI controls. And to be able to access the incentive height and FSI controls, proponents will need to demonstrate how they're actually going to provide community benefit by way of delivering community infrastructure on their sites. Right. So that is fundamentally how it's linked. Right.
So we have some questions coming in. What is the CBD planning proposal doing to protect amenity within the CBD?
That's a good question. I'd probably say there are probably a few elements to that that I touched on in the presentation. The first one is solar access. And so having a very specific focus on solar access to protect amenity within the CBD has been critical for us, not only to open space, public open space, but also to heritage items. I would also include heritage in that. Heritage adds a significant amount of value to the amenity of a city and a reflection of its history, really. And so we do have new controls within the planning proposal that seek to further protect heritage. And design excellence. We've also revised our kind of triggers in the design excellence clause to ensure more developments go through the design excellence process, because we see value in that also.
Well, thanks, Jen. In terms of utilities, at what point will all the utilities collaborate so that they can maximise their presence and give effect to the planning proposal and its outcomes?
So through this engagement process, we are consulting with a whole range of public authorities, including utilities. And so it is very important for us to engage with utilities at this strategic planning process. And we are doing that at the moment. They'll always have a role at the development assessment stage, but we're trying to see how much of that we can actually bring at the front end through the strategic planning phase. And
was the capacity of infrastructure, the nature of utilities planning for the CBD a major constraint or concern?
It was a concern. It is something that we have investigated in great detail. However, and also have had previous conversations with some of the utilities as we've been developing the planning proposal over the past few years.
And I guess given that the city is on a floodplain, that is a really important planning consideration. I understand the approach that you've taken around managing refuge and around the design provisions in the planning proposal recognise that. Has the understanding of the nature of flooding in Parramatta shaped the planning proposal to a great degree?
It has when it's come to how we deal with evacuation, fundamentally. So the strategy, given the nature of the CBD, its location, the intensity of development that we are proposing, all being in line with council and state government objectives, there is a strong desire and need to support further growth of the CBD. Unfortunately, it does sit within the floodplain, and so therefore we need to manage that risk very, very carefully. Given the nature of the floods that occur within Parramatta, they do, they are fast floods. They recede quite quickly. And so we have done all the technical investigations and have the advice that shelter in place in this instance is workable within Parramatta and something that we should continue to investigate. So that's really the kind of the philosophy that's behind the flood risk management plan that's currently on public exhibition.
And I assume you mean shelter in place is stay where you are.
That's right. And so what we are looking as part of the building designs to ensure that there are components of buildings that facilitate that. common areas so people can seek refuge within the building while they're waiting the floodwaters to recede.
And how will growth in the CBD impact transport? And I guess that works two ways in terms of the supply of transport infrastructure and also demand for the use of transport.
Yeah, so with a significant increase in density, if we don't have a significant mode shift to public transport or a significant decrease in the provision of car parking, our roads themselves will become car parks. And so I think that's one key component that we've been focusing on in particular. One of the key provisions within our planning proposal is to lower car parking rates.
Yeah.
Okay. As most people are aware, there's been a significant investment in public transport in Parramatta with Parramatta Light Rail and Sydney Metro, and so a significant mode shift to infrastructure like that will assist in managing transport. Now, the integrated transport plan that we're also working on will bring all this together and highlight the need for that mode shift to public transport and support the need to reduce car parking.
And is any aspect of the planning proposal contingent on certain infrastructure coming to pass?
Not at this stage, it's not. However, what it does highlight is that there's a significant deficit in local community infrastructure that needs to be provided to support the incoming population that will result from this increased density. So that is why community infrastructure is linked to the incentive FSR and height maps.
And I guess broadly linked to the transport question is one around pedestrian amenity that's been asked here. Has Council considered pedestrian amenity, and how would this be managed in relation to the increased residential densities?
Yeah, absolutely. So there are probably two components to this. We do require street activation, so I touched on that briefly in the presentation, where there is a specific map within the LEP that requires street activation along many streets within the CBD to provide increased amenity for pedestrians. We are very mindful as part of our pedestrian strategy that the volumes of pedestrians within our CBD will increase significantly over a period of time. And so we are also looking at road widening to not only facilitate more roads, but wider footpaths, for example. And solar access to key public spaces too has been very important to ensure that not only pedestrians, but those that want to sit outside and have their lunch in the sun can do so, with a high level of amenity.
One of the questions here relates to a question I asked earlier, and that's around how do higher yields deliver community benefits? And I asked a similar question around ultimately the height and floor space incentives are intended to, in total, deliver an advantage for the CBD. And I guess if you isolate the individual incentives and you do your yield calculations, obviously a greater yield will be possible in those incentive sites or where there's a design excellence competition. But I guess what the question is will that deliver benefit for the community? Will that extra yield combined with that excellence deliver overall benefit?
Well, in the view of the council, yes, because that incentive FSR, that extra yield, can only be accessed if community infrastructure is provided. If community infrastructure is not provided, you can't access the additional FSR. The two are intrinsically linked.
I see. How did you set the building heights for the planning proposal?
So I think the first space was essentially a study of the existing heights and comparison of that together with the existing floor space ratios. We also considered that was done through significant urban design analysis around what appropriate heights should be located where within the CBD. We also considered the solar access to open space and key heritage areas, including items and conservation areas. That has very much impacted the location of specific heights in the CBD. We then have considered aviation limits. So what are the genuinely maximum heights that can potentially be achieved? You will see on the maps, I think the colour is black, being the highest height that could be actually located within the CBD. When you actually consider urban design analysis, solar access, and so forth, that you'll see that there are some lower heights, but there are also some sites within the CBD that can potentially actually access quite significant heights.
And I recall during your presentation, you mentioned that there'll still be a referral requirement for some of the very tall buildings.
That's right, yeah.
Do you see issues with how that'll play out? Will there be another bite at the cherry from the aviation authorities on heights?
Well, there shouldn't be, because we're engaging with them now. And so and this is the second time we've engaged with them. We have spoken to them in depth previously about setting these heights. They have been revised, and for anyone that has been following this planning proposal journey will see that we have very much refined the heights that are now proposed. They have an opportunity to speak now, and we'll be encouraging them to do so.
Okay, and I noticed there's a question there, how state agencies are being involved.
So we've been engaging with quite a number of state government agencies for some time. The Transport for New South Wales and RMS and Department of Planning are the key ones, including the Department of Heritage New South Wales. So there have been several that we've taken on the journey through this process. We, as part of not only the gateway determination, but also the nature of this planning proposal, have engaged with many state government agencies and continue to do so right now.
There's a question about why some areas are not in the planning proposal.
Yes, I think that question might relate to the pink areas that I showed earlier in the presentation. There's an area down at West Auto Alley and North Parramatta. Now those areas are located on the periphery of the CBD, between very much high density, either commercial or residential development within the CBD, next to a heritage conservation area, and it's land between that. Now, they have not been included because the council feels that further work needs to be done on that. And so we will be doing further work on those precincts, and they'll be run as a separate process.
Right. Look, I've got a question about the heights and floor space incentives. Collectively, there's quite a yield advantage to participate in the incentives on offer. Do you think that yield advantage will be supported by the market? Do you think there will be substantial development interest in taking the design excellence, the incentives, the additional high performance building opportunities? In terms of the market testing, do you think these yield opportunities through the controls and the planning proposals will continue to be attractive?
I believe so, and the reason for that is because we have quite a number of site-specific planning proposals that we have either already assessed and supported and have been notified, or in the process of assessing at the moment, that are largely consistent with the provisions within the planning proposal. And so that tells me that there's an acceptance and an interest in complying with the provisions within the CBDPP. A lot of these developments that have resulted in a notified planning proposal have actually progressed to a design competition and a DA. There are a couple that are starting to be built now. So that's evidence to show that we are on the right track, that they're the right numbers, the right height, the right density, and so forth. There'll always need to be probably, an opportunity for us to refine, but that's something that we'll do as we go through the DCP process and also through the DA process.
There's a question there relates to the heat island effect. Has the analysis around the planning proposal taken the potential heat island effect of the development outcomes from the planning proposal into account?
Yeah, so there's been a fair amount of work done around the high performing buildings clause. Now that is a new clause that I haven't come across very much in other LEPs, particularly in high density LEPs, or particularly in central and western Sydney, and that very much does focus on ensuring that buildings are designed in a way that minimises the heat island effect, particularly when you're dealing with particular materials, air conditioning, and the like.
Right, and there's a question there relates to the quantum of housing that'll be the yield that will be achieved under the planning proposal, and how the quantum of housing that might be possible under the planning proposal meets or addresses council and the Greater Sydney Commission's targets for the district.
Yeah, so under this planning proposal will achieve 14,000 new dwellings within the CBD over a 40-year period. The Parramatta local government area is set to double in population over the same period of time, or roughly the same period of time, which is significant. And there are key precincts within the Parramatta local government area, including the Parramatta CBD, that will contribute to achieving our housing target. We will and truly achieve the housing target within Parramatta when focusing on particularly the precincts that we've already identified through our LSPS and local housing strategy. And the CBDPP plays a significant role in that.
Proportionally, most or some?
I wouldn't say most, I would say some.
Right. We've got a question about the design excellence clause. I was wondering if you could elaborate on how that's to be achieved.
Yes, certainly. So we've had a design excellence clause within the Parramatta CBD.
And how it was developed as well, where it came from.
Yes, certainly. So the design excellence clause has been within the Parramatta LEP for some time, several years in fact. We have a city architect and a small team that support design excellence competitions. We've run the most design excellence competitions in the States, which is a reflection of the interest and the rising design excellence bar within Parramatta, which is excellent. So the clause, I believe, is a standard clause, and what we've done, given that we have run quite a number of design excellence competitions, that we've used our learnings through that process to identify, well, what further improvement or changes should we be making to the clause to further increase the bar of design excellence within the CBD. And so they're the things that we're particularly focusing on. Well, we should be putting more buildings through the design excellence process because we see significant value through that.
And what sort of things have happened, or that can you see? What type of characteristics of buildings that have been through that process are you seeing? What features in them?
So improved quality when it comes to design, public domain, materials, finishes. We've included processes to ensure that those elements that are secured at the design competition process are well and truly secured through the DA and construction certificate and occupation certificate to make sure that design is not dumbed down. Okay,
so you couldn't spot the difference looking at a building?
That is our aim, and that is what we're working very, very hard to achieve. Right.
Now, there's a question about COVID, and I guess whether the planning proposal's been pressure tested against a COVID future. Or at least the changes that we understand might be happening with COVID. And actually, interestingly, today, the Greater Sydney Commission published a report around the planning implications for COVID. But the question is, would COVID have an impact on the planning proposal vision?
I don't believe so. There'll always need to be a need to address the demand for jobs. I think we haven't seen any substantial changes over this period of time, over the past 6 or 7 months as we've been experiencing COVID, in the nature of the design or demand for commercial office space within Parramatta. It has interestingly and surprisingly been the same, but only time will tell. This is very new to all of us. And so at this point in time, I don't see that there'll be any significant impacts. And if there are, we'll just need to consider those as we go through the process.
And I guess it's a follow-on question, the one there about jobs. How is council encouraging jobs for the central city CBD through the planning proposal?
By providing increased density and incentives. That's a significant part of it. We're still seeing commercial buildings going up. We're still seeing DAs coming in for commercial buildings. We're still seeing a consistent interest in the development of commercial buildings within the CBD, which is excellent. In terms of supporting jobs, through this planning proposal, we're increasing the commercial core area by about 75%. There we have commercial incentives, and we also have unlimited office space FSRs in the commercial core, which is at the heart of the CBD.
Right. So, look, I would have thought also that the jobs are attracted to the amenity that's on offer, and which is hopefully promoted by a whole range of connected decisions for the CBD. Is there an interest that you're hearing from employers in locating in a high amenity CBD?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, the feedback and the requests that we certainly receive is that a lot of investors in particular are very interested and supportive of other initiatives that the council are working on. So, for example, revitalising the river, because that has a significant role when it comes to amenity, particularly for securing employees. Public transport is a significant part of that as well. People want to be able to easily access their job or their place of employment. And beautiful and activated streets are also critical in that. And so we do have a very long-term vision, and we are working on that. We are upgrading significant streets like Phillip Street at the moment. Parramatta Light Rail, when it's finished, will not only provide a vital public transport connection, but also revitalise streets.
And I guess flowing from that, in the future, there will be future announcements and discussions around major, particularly transport infrastructure with the development of the Western Sydney Airport, future potential metros, West Metro, potential ring roads in the vicinity of Parramatta. Will the plan be flexible, or will it take into account those future potential pieces of infrastructure?
As much as possible at the moment, yes. And like any planning instruments, it will be the subject of review. And as commitments are made to major infrastructure in the future, we would have to obviously need to make sure that our plans are up to date and reflect that infrastructure. But at this point in time, yes, it does acknowledge the current commitments of the government and also the council.
Okay, thank you very much, Jennifer. I think it's time to wrap up the Q&A session, and thank you very much for all of those questions. And if there are others, Council have made a commitment to follow them through. As I've noted in the introduction, the forum is being recorded, and we'll share this with all the registered guests. And I understand the planning proposal is on exhibition till the 2nd of November, and Council is keen to receive your feedback. I understand you've seen the web link that's available for submissions. So myself and Jen would very much like to thank you for attending this forum, and thank you for your interest in this city shaping project.
Thank you. Thank you very much.